I figured life is short, so you should try and do things that really move you. I like to do things of consequence, which is why once I found out Linacare actually could help people significantly, that made me more interested.
One lesson you've taken from the corporate world that you've applied really deeply and earnestly to the nonprofit world?
Fiscal discipline. You learn by example. You don't learn by people telling you what to do. We have all the same issues of urban kind of challenges, drug addiction, poverty, homelessness. And so it's very complicated for a small little community to try and figure out how are we going to fix this.
How do you personally distinguish between admirable perseverance and stubbornness, simply refusing to let go? You know, where do you draw that line, or have you not figured that out yet?
I haven't figured that out yet. I thought I was going to come and save Chinatown. In some ways, this mission saved me because it provided me the energy and the drive and the passion to pursue something that is, as we say, is greater than yourself.
This is Giants. On this show, we sit down with the founders, builders, and visionaries who helped shape Vancouver and are building what it will become. The decisions, the disasters, the defining moments. I'm Najid Kassam. Let's dig in.
Today, we're filming from the Chinatown Storytelling Center. And our giant today is an entrepreneur, philanthropist, and the driving force behind one of Canada's most ambitious community revitalization efforts. As the chair of the Vancouver Chinatown Foundation, she is helping transform Vancouver's historic Chinatown through affordable housing, healthcare, cultural programming, and support for local businesses. She also owns the Chinatown Barbecue and is reopening the iconic Ho Ho restaurant later this year, all part of her vision to breathe new life into one of Canada's most historic neighborhoods. She is the chair of the UBC Properties Trust, serves on a number of boards, and has been recognized with both the Order of Canada and the Order of British Columbia. In 2025, she was included in Vancouver Magazine's Power 50 list for the 10th consecutive year. And in 2026, she was included in the Power 50 Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm Giants welcome to Carol Lee.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be in this beautiful and amazing space with such a person I have so much love and respect for. My first question is really simple. How do you do it all? Have you found a way to slow down time, clone yourself? How do you manage to balance all these amazing things you're working on?
I think when you really love what you're doing, it doesn't actually feel like work. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it's actually true. So I find a way of balancing. I'm good at reprioritizing. So things come in and I can kind of move things around. And I'm lucky at this stage that I've kind of created an ecosystem of people that want to create a better community. So it's all working out okay.
I think it's really interesting when you talk about an ecosystem of people. You know, this show, we've interviewed so many amazing leaders and, you know, we get to for hopefully many, many more months to come. They always talk about the people around them. They always talk about the communities they've built, the teams they've built, and you're obviously no exception. Let's dive in a little bit where it started. And you know, you grew up in a family synonymous with community building, with business excellence. But I would be remiss to not mention your dad, someone, rest his soul, who was, you know, truly iconic in the city of Vancouver. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to share something a bit personal and something that I don't think I've even told Aisha, because you may not know, I think you do actually know, I have a book coming out in the next few months. It's called Giants of Vancouver. And unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to interview your dad because he passed just as the project was kind of getting its legs. However, I did know your dad a little bit over the years.
I know you did.
He was a dear friend of our family. And I think he came to our wedding, if I was right. I know you did. But
I was there and he was, both my parents were at your wedding.
And I think his knowledge, his wisdom, and maybe his kindness really spilled from the edges. And he was that guy, the kind of person who I describe as an exemplar. Yeah. And to me, that's the highest level of compliment. Now, the personal side of this story is actually that in the title of the book, when we were looking for a title of the book, I remember thinking to myself, we need a title that well describes people like Bob Lee. That man was a giant. And it was literally about your dad. I remember having the book about him that it's coffee table book or something, right? And I remember looking at that book and thinking to myself, giants. Well, fast forward, that gave rise to the title of the book, which planted the seed for this podcast where you are sitting today. And we're so grateful to have you. I think the impact of our elders around us is so profound, and your dad is no exception. So go back all those years ago, the dinner table. What was it like growing up in the Lee family?
You know, we grew up in a very close family, as you know, and we're very close to your family too. He was the most positive person you can imagine. He never said a bad word about anybody. Anything was possible. And he made good things happen. And I think that, you know, I feel so lucky to have grown up with that, an example, and tried as best as I could to sort of follow his footsteps of just doing good things. And, you know, he created this group of people around him that wanted the same thing for the city of Vancouver and for the province. So I think you learn by example. You don't learn by people telling you what to do. You learn by watching somebody. And he was really one of the finest people I've ever met.
And it's interesting because we talk about all these, you know, people like yourself, giants who are a little bit larger than life and done incredible things. And, you know, sometimes folks who have done incredibly well or made a lot of money or created a ton of impact, not only do they just have an ego, but they have there's an air to them. Yeah. It couldn't be more opposite of the way that you were raised and the family values that, you know, you kind of had. And it's nice to hear that the guy he was in public was the same person he was in private.
Yeah. I think the word that I would use to describe my father would be he was incredibly kind. Yeah. Very decent man, but incredibly kind to everybody.
What did you learn most from him?
How to treat people. Yeah. I mean, he was kind and good to everybody he met. It didn't matter if it was, you know, President of the United States, all the way to the person who was, you know, looking after him, you know, waiter, somebody, you know, a service provider. He was so nice to everyone. And, you know, little things would come up. Like I remember coming back from, you know, I was going to my office building and I worked with my dad for a while and I was commenting to the security guard at the front desk. I said, "Oh, nice tie, Roger." And he goes, "Oh, it's from your dad. He brought it back for me from Hong Kong." Thinking, how does my dad have time to remember Roger? So, but that's the way he was. And I think that, you know, when you want to do the kinds of things that he did, people have to want to work with you. And I think that that was the magic of my father, was that he managed to mobilize a lot of people to want to do the right thing.
There's got to have been a degree of pressure growing up in a house like that, at least if it wasn't stated, maybe understated or subtle. Was there ever, you know, did you ever feel that growing up to follow in his footsteps, to try to match or to live up to any of those expectations? Or was that not the vibe of the family?
You know, I think any kind of pressure you put on, you put it on yourself. Like it really never came from the parents. But that being said, you know, I think it was probably, I was lucky in that I was a girl. I think there was a little bit a different expectation for the girls in the family versus the boys. So I don't know if you ask my brothers if they would say the same thing. I think there's, you know, a lot more pressure to sort of follow the footsteps. Mine was sort of an accidental career, you know.
And we'll actually talk about that in just a second. But I do want to talk about, you know, while we're here, not all of us get the chance to work with our parents. I think that's probably a double-edged sword, if I had to guess. But, you know, talk to me about what was the most amazing part about that experience, and talk about some of the things that were harder in that.
Well, you know, just even doing the Chinatown Foundation, you know, in the beginning, he was incredibly discouraging.
I've got a quote that I'm going to ask you about later.
Oh my God. Everybody, you know, later on say, "Oh, your father came over and he was trying to say, tell Carol not to do it. Such a bad idea." And, you know, I think that it's understandable because as a parent, which you are, you don't want your kids, you want your kids not to fail. So I think that, you know, and he'd said to me, trying to revitalize Chinatown is going to be 10 times harder than UBC Properties Trust, which he created 40 years ago. And now that I'm actually chair, I would agree that it is probably way harder. But on the other hand, you know, once I decided I was going to do it, because I said, look, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? He was incredibly supportive. And I think that that was something that he did with many, many people, that once you were in, he was going to help you to the best of his ability.
I wonder in this world of instant gratification, if those people are made anymore. Do they make them like that anymore? I think you're one of those people, so they clearly do. But I hope that there's more and more of us can learn from that kind of. You aren't just building a team. You're building a village to really do something, whether it's transform Chinatown, whether it's build businesses, change our province, whatever it might be. I think that's a remarkably difficult thing to find.
My business partner, actually, Henry, had said to me, so he was another person who said, you can do this. I'll support you in it, but it will be harder than making Linacare $1 billion business. And he was also right. Because in some ways, business, at least you're all aligned to going to make money.
Yep.
And it just depends on how we're going to divvy up the pie. But when you do this kind of work, people have a lot of different kinds of, there's different agendas and, ideology, and not everybody wants the same thing. So it is a very challenging prospect, but it's kind of what I like doing. I like solving problems. And to me, this was a complicated one and it seemed really interesting. And so in the end, my father was there and he was hugely helpful. And in fact, your father-in-law was there at the very beginning. So when we had our first gala, when we announced that we were going to be doing this.
I was in the room.
Were you in the room?
I was in the room.
Oh my God. So I'm very grateful for that. So at some point, things change and then you sort of create this momentum of people that want to support you.
Well,
so
it takes a village to the point before.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your grandpa. That he was chosen by his village, boarded a boat with a one-way ticket, and moved and built a new business and a new life. Firstly, tell me that story, because I want to hear it not from him, but from the closest we've got left.
So in those days, so it was the early 1900s, what a village would do is that they would select the strongest
What village
male.
was he coming from?
He was coming from Taishan, so it's southern China.
Yep.
And they would buy a one-way ticket, and that person was to come over here and send money back to the village.
So he got here, and then what happened?
Well, you get here, and then he was a houseboy, like many of them, and managed to, I guess, save some money. And he was considered one of the architects and the pioneers of Chinatown. So, he was a remarkable man. So often people will say, oh, did you learn what you learned from your father? And it's like, actually, it started with my grandfather. We did a little short film on, this man came in and he was from the Ing Association. So, he only spoke Chinese, but we did a film. And so I was able to read the subtitles. And what I found out was that he came over here when he was in his 80s. But during the Second World War, so he was just a young boy then, his whole family perished, except he and his sister survived because of philanthropists from North America that set money so that he could have a bowl of rice like every other day. 170,000 people died of famine, but he was one of the survivors. And I found out later my grandfather was the philanthropist. So that's kind of
remarkable. That shivers in your spine. Remarkable.
It did.
Yeah.
When we watched it, it's like now, and he had gone to my grandfather's gravesite to pay his respects. And it was very important that he tell us his story. So,
that's truly amazing.
My grandfather really was the person who did so much in the community at a time when, you think about it, he was very poor. We were relegated. This is basically a ghetto, but he found a way to help a community thrive despite a lot of hardship and a lot of obstacles in their way.
And you're a second
generation.
And have dedicated so much of your work in this chapter of your life to preserving Chinese culture, and both in and of itself, but also with its relationship to Vancouver, including the building of this beautiful space, the Vancouver Storytelling Center, Chinatown Storytelling Center here in Vancouver. How have you remained so connected to this heritage, and why is it so important to you?
To be honest, growing up as a second generation Canadian in the British properties, I would say my early years, every child wants to fit in and feel like they belong. So in a lot of ways, I kind of distanced myself and really almost, I would say, rejected the culture. So, but it wasn't until I moved here, my office I opened in Chinatown in 2004. And, all of those memories of growing up here and family, it was this flood of nostalgia.
And stories. There must have been stories.
And we spent a lot of, family, celebrations, dinners. And I think that you don't realize how important something is until you're at the risk of losing it. And I could sort of see Chinatown had changed a lot. It was on a decline, and the problems facing it were very complex. It wasn't going to be easy to fix them. And so I thought, well, maybe we should come and help. And that really was the reason why. So it was a gradual process. It wasn't like,
embracing this culture and this history. Yeah.
No, I mean, it took me like I was, an adult by then, had come back.
It was only in the last 20, 25 years.
Only the last really 20 years. Because I moved back here in 2004. So 20 years that I could see that it was it was a rediscovery in some ways. And so that's why I moved my office here and thought, I want to be part of this revitalization. And, when we started this project, we always had the intention that if we can try and help revitalize this neighborhood, it's one of the most challenging neighborhoods in the country, that we could use some of the lessons that we learn to help other communities revitalize.
And we'll spend a bunch of time talking about all that in a few minutes. Your grandfather's story, the stories that you've heard over and over again are ultimately stories of resilience. What are some of the values that your grandpa, your dad, these stories, what are they what are the values that were passed on to you that you feel so responsible for carrying forward, and how were they communicated?
Well, I think this particular Chinatown was important for me to try and preserve, in the sense that, the Chinese Canadians, or Chinese, they weren't Canadians at the time, helped build a railroad, which really was the reason that Canada became a country, or why British Columbia became a part of Canada. And so Chinatown, this is where they ended up. There was no passage to go back to China, and they weren't really allowed anywhere else. So they ended up creating this little community on the edge of Falls Creek. It was called Saltwater City. And to me, this is the physical legacy of that contribution and sacrifice. So for me, it wasn't really like, I think Chinatowns are important. I felt this one was. I felt this particular Chinatown was, because it represented that they belonged, that they helped make Canada country.
I'm a dad, 2 young boys, 2 wonderful, rambunctious young boys. And my wife and I talk a lot about value teaching and creating resiliency. Some of the same kind of stories that you've told have mimicked in other communities. They're not the same, but they have a lot of the same flavors, so to speak. How do we teach our kids and our grandkids about these values and these stories? And how are you doing that with this work?
Well, it's interesting. When we did the Storytelling Center 5 years ago, it really was through the lens of the Chinese Canadian experience. But we knew that this is really the immigrant story of all immigrant families that come over and, make tremendous sacrifices, but they've helped create like this amazing country, Canada, that we live in. You sort of learn through this, like the reason we called it Storytelling Center instead of museum, it was very deliberate. And I felt that, these are neighborhoods where there was a lot, at least Chinatown, there's probably a lot of illiteracy. And there wasn't any one big heroic figure. It was all these little stories that if you put them together, it created a lot of impact in this city and this province and this country. And I think you really learn from the stories. And that to me is why stories are what we think are the most precious. This is a place where it's not about artifacts. The artifacts enhance the stories, but it's not a place where we've got all of these expensive, museum pieces. It's really about the stories and how these people shaped their communities.
One of the things I find so fascinating, I haven't thought about this a ton, but when you say that, you think about so many cultures, whether it's Indigenous Canadian cultures, Chinese cultures, South Asian culture, African culture. Storytelling is at the center of all of it.
Yes.
And it's like almost a universal value.
It is.
To share values, to share histories, to share hopes. It's actually really a beautiful thing.
I had a very difficult time. This was 2016, and nobody wanted to call it the Storytelling Center. They wanted to call it, we should be a museum, we should be a heritage center, we should be a history center. But to me, as you say, stories are the center of everything. And I think that it's the way people connect. It's through stories. And they're very approachable. Like one of the things that I wanted in this Storytelling Center was that everything felt very accessible. Didn't matter who you were. And it's not, you don't have to be quiet. You can talk, you can touch things, you can drink inside. And I wanted it to feel welcoming. And it's so interesting how now storytelling doesn't feel like it did in 2016. Everybody's like, oh, it's so great. You call it Storytelling Center. But now that's what people are embracing.
To jump on that bandwagon, we call ourselves a storytelling podcast. So
I love it.
It's inconsequential relative to the work you're doing, but it is funny that train has become quite popular.
When we're talking about stories of resilience, I think that we wanted to make it very clear in this place, in the Storytelling Center, that yes, there was a lot of, faced a lot of hardship. They exhibited a lot of resilience and perseverance, but also the people here were very good to us. Like, it wasn't just about discrimination. There was a lot of amazing Canadians. And that I think that, in this little ghetto, because Chinatown was a ghetto, in one generation, we had 3 university chancellors. My father at UBC, Brant Louis, and Milton Wong at SFU. That says a lot about the people, those individuals, but it says a lot about the country that allowed us to come here and integrated us into the society. So that was another value that we wanted to see. I didn't want it to be oppressive that, it's like, we didn't want to sugarcoat it and say, it was easy. It was difficult, but it also was the host country and the people. And I think your community is very similar.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before the Chinatown Foundation, before the work you're currently doing, you worked in a number of careers, real estate, sales, and eventually launched your own company, Linacare, which is cosmetherapy in 2004, I think, right? Yeah. 2004. There isn't a lot about this chapter in your life, so I'm going to poke and prod a little here. And please, I apologize for that. But how did it begin? What was, I always believe that you have to be obsessed with a problem to build a company. You have to care deeply about a problem that you want to solve. What was that problem in your case and what motivated you to solve it?
Well, it didn't really start with Linacare. So my business partner, Henry Fung, who passed away last year, was a Harvard scientist. So he was an MD, PhD, pharmacology, and he happened to work with the pioneer of the kidney transplant. So they had very, very dry skin. And some of them had such dry skin, he said that they wanted to commit suicide. It was like having a mosquito bite on your whole body. So he created, none of the creams worked. And he wanted to see if he could create a drug delivery, like a delivery system that could deliver water through the skin barrier. To be honest, I wasn't really that interested in it in the beginning because he had something else that I really wanted to work on. And it was a new class of drug that could increase the force of contraction of the heart by 30 or 40%.
Oh, wow.
And it had all the properties of an oral medication. So, Henry was a Nobel Prize level, and those are the kinds of things I was interested in working on, like things that had a consequence, not a skincare product. But I also saw that biotech had binary outcomes. Either they're amazingly successful or you have nothing. So actually the idea of the Linacare came through. It's like, okay, this is something that is like low tech. But it was an amazing water delivery system. So I said, okay, why don't we do that? That can help fund the other project. And that's actually what happened. So, but I came to love it when I found out that it wasn't just a beauty product. It could actually heal the skin. And so we ended up selling products at, University Health Network in Toronto, chemotherapy patients. It healed the skin. And so when I talked to some of the oncologists, they said, this isn't just about making people feel better. We actually, if the skin breaks down, we have to change or reduce the efficacy of the chemotherapies. But with your product, it actually heals the skin. So to me, then it was like, okay, that's okay. That'd be interesting.
How long did you work on it?
We worked on it, I would say 5 years.
And I think in my research, and I think you said this in an interview before, you've had some pretty material offers to sell it.
Yeah.
But up till now, is that right? You've still refused?
Yes.
In a culture that's obsessed with exiting, I've exited a company.
Yeah.
I'm a sellout in that way. Yeah. What's kept it close to heart?
I'm not sure. I have a girlfriend in New York who was very close to the late Leonard Lauder. And she actually said to me, she goes, I told Leonard, this is the best cream in the world. She goes, I want you to meet, but I didn't want it to become a beauty product. I like helping people. I like solving problems. And for me, I wanted to be a health product. My dream was to do clinical trials at Harvard Medical School and then make it a therapeutic, which is why we called it cosmotherapy, and then maybe transition into be used for the health and wellness industry. So it's still my dream. If I had one thing left, that's what I'll go back to.
Carol, you got lots of time.
And in fact, I just had a meeting this morning on that. I haven't given up on it yet. So that's a possibility.
But you did take a step back a little bit when and how?
Probably about 2015.
Okay.
So Henry said to me, goes, look, it was almost like a Sophie's choice. You can do one or the other. You can do Chinatown revitalization or you could do Linacare. And he goes, if I were you, he said, Linacare, you will be like another, business school graduate that made a lot of money. But this other route, saving Chinatown, he goes, you'll leave a legacy for future generations. And he goes, I think you should do that. And that's what happened.
But you're still involved in some ways. You still have some ownership in the business.
Well, I own the business. I put it on hold. And I think in the next couple of years, I'll sort of see whether or not it can be resurrected.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Well,
but thanks for asking about it. Everyone asks me.
We look forward to seeing the revitalization, no pun intended, of Linacare.
Thank you.
Looking back on those early years of your career, where you tried a number of things and you found something special, Linacare, and then maybe your calling in this chapter in the Chinatown Foundation. What were you searching for? Tell me about those. You had success early, you had struggles early, whatever. But what was that search? Tell me about that.
Sometimes you don't even know what you're searching for. And, I'm sure my parents were kind of like, oh my God, like every 5 years, I didn't change jobs. I changed industries. But, I think it was like late 90s, I ended up having breast cancer. And I think that really was a big sort of aha moment. It's like, what is it that you want to do? So I got out of the real estate business and I sold my apartment. I moved to Hong Kong. And that's kind of when it was like, all the possibilities open up. And that's kind of when I started on the Linacare pathway. So it's just because I don't think that would have been a natural progression. Otherwise I wouldn't, but I figured life is short. So you should try and do things that, really make you, really move you. And Henry's assessment of me is that I like to do things of consequence, which is why once I found out Linacare actually could help people significantly, that made me more interested. I wasn't interested in doing a skincare product. But I also found out that I think it's sort of like the Steve Jobs quote, that you don't really know how the dots are going to connect. You can only have faith that they will connect. And I think that along the way, every 5 years I would change it, but I collected people. And wisdom, but a lot of people who I kept in my circle. And those are the people that helped me basically in this chapter. I was a good community builder. I found out that was kind of my calling. And I like, help solving problems. And to me, I feel really lucky that I really stumbled on it. So it wasn't something that like 30 years ago, you could say, oh, you want to help
be an accountant or a lawyer or whatever?
you want to revitalize China. It was a gradual thing. It's like anything. You learn to love something once you're in it. And for me, it wasn't even, I had moved my office here for Linacare, but it wasn't really because I wanted to save Chinatown. It was just like, oh, I'm here and the place is falling apart. I need to do something. And that's really what happened.
I'd be remiss if we didn't spend time digging into this beautiful building and your important work here in what I'm going to call this chapter of your life. We are sitting here in the heart of Chinatown, a place that you are so deeply passionate about and has so much history in your family. I'm not even going to try to cover everything there is to talk about this building and about your project and about this important work. But we will link additional learning resources about the Chinatown Foundation in our show description and the notes. And we hope that our listeners take the time to read, be inspired, support, and maybe even visit this beautiful space. So let's go back to the beginning of this project, when it was just an idea. How did it begin? Where did the idea come from? And please talk us through those early conversations, including the story, quote unquote, pitching to your dad, where I think you've mentioned before, his first response was, it's impossible, which doesn't sound like your dad. And I knew him well enough to know that. Did he really say that? What happened? Take me back, Carol.
So my dad absolutely said it's
No
impossible.
way.
He did. And actually, Henry, who's probably the smartest person I know, said it will be very challenging because there were so many factors that, our proximity to the downtown East Side. And we have all the same issues of urban kind of challenges, drug addiction, poverty, homelessness. And so it's very complicated for a small little community to try and figure out how are we going to fix this. So
where did it start? I want to start there. Let's
what do you mean?
How did the idea start? I'm going to go and build this and revitalize an entire, that's insane. And I think now I'm thinking about it more. Your dad's response was probably right in some way.
It was.
Not right in the sense it was correct, but
Yeah.
rational.
My dad's response was absolutely rational. Nobody thought we could do this. And when I was going through my father's effects, I actually found a letter to him written in 1967, it was from the city of Vancouver, what to do about Chinatown. So it has been a problem for a long time. I swear to God. Yes. It's up in my office. So it has been a problem for a long time. I'm just this idea of how do you revitalize a neighborhood like Chinatown? But I like solving complicated problems. So it was kind of almost like, oh, this sounds really interesting. And when my father passed away, we had a company, Deloitte, that since we have a family business, we all had to do this like a Myers-Briggs. You take these personality tests and you don't think they're going to be very accurate because they take 10 minutes. But when you read it, it's like, oh my God, that's, goes to the heart of you. And what I found out, I'm an innovator creator. So actually that is my happy place. My happy place is to solve complex problems, which is probably why I was attracted to helping figure out what can we do with Chinatown?
So your office is here.
My office is here.
And then what happens? It's 2004. And over the next 10 years, you start to think about this problem.
Yeah. So I moved my office, the Linacare office here in 2004. And over the course of the next 8 years, I noticed a decline, and I can figure out that on this trajectory, Chinatown will disappear in about 10 years, and we should probably try and do something. So that's when really in earnest, I had my first gala. And once again, I do things very quickly, and it was going to be in 3 months. My dad goes, that's impossible. You can't do it. The bank said the same thing. But once I get something in my mind, I think that, no, I need to do it right away. And
so what
we're off
was
to the
that
races.
First idea? What was the first thing you wanted to do?
Well, what's really interesting when I go back to what I outlined in those first 2 years of the galas, we actually accomplished everything. I wanted to build housing, the Bob and Michael's place over in the downtown East Side. We wanted to build a storytelling center. We wanted to have economic revitalization. We have a 3-pillar approach. It's really those things: physical revitalization and social housing, economic development, and cultural revitalization. And so the projects that we outlined, we basically did them all. It was a big, heavy lift, though. When you work the housing project, so it's 231 units. We have a 50,000 square foot integrated health facility. It required 3 levels of government, a health authority. It was very complicated.
Those early days when you started fundraising, you started dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
How did you validate the idea? Who were you talking to?
Well, actually, it happened at the very first gala, and it was your father-in-law was instrumental. I think that the story, as we talked about, of the struggle and, your family history is kind of similar. Coming here as an immigrant, really knowing nobody and making your way. And I think it must have resonated. So sometimes it's you feel that there's a greater force up there that's validating it, because I had one of my board members came back and said, do you realize this never happens?
It doesn't. I worked in the sector for a long time.
No, but I didn't realize it though. It's oh, okay, this is natural. So I think sometimes that you have to believe in something greater than yourself. And I feel that I've had a lot of things like that, whether or not it's serendipity but something up there is sort of helped me continue on. Despite the hardship, you'll have little signs along the way that say, I don't know, keep going, keep going. And that was the first one. And I'm very grateful, that happened that way.
Almost 15 years?
No, the first gala was in 2016. So only 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
You've been working to revive a neighborhood that so many had written off for so long. How do you personally distinguish between admirable perseverance and Stubbornness, simply refusing to let go. Where do you draw that line, or have you not figured that out yet?
I haven't figured that out yet. But I guess I never wanted to stop before I knew that it was not going to be possible. You don't want to end up stopping at the 1 yard line, knowing that if you just stayed in a little bit longer, you were going to make it. So, I feel very lucky that, one of my mentors said to me, or said to somebody else, that Carol's one of 2 people in the world that I know that if she says she's going to do something, she's going to do it. So I actually think I have a personality where I almost will kill myself to try and get it done. And partly because I don't say I'm going to do it unless I actually think I can do it. So,
do you have any stories about when that was really tangibly obvious, or when that kind of perseverance, especially with this project? Anything specific? No,
because on the other things I gave up. Every 5 years, changing a job. Somehow this one, there were signs along the way that says, no, you need to keep going. You need to keep going. And sometimes it's not until you step back that you realize it was a very ambitious project because it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just like, we're doing housing. It was like, you basically have to mobilize almost an entire city to sort of see that this is worth saving. But
speaking of mobilization,
yes,
I think one of the most underrated skills in building, whether it's building companies, communities, buildings themselves, is the ability to create and maintain partnerships. A skill that you are fantastic at. With this foundation, it seems like you've been able to get a heck of a lot of partners, corporate, multiple levels of government, nonprofit, community, God knows what else. Even when this was just a crazy idea from a very accomplished human being. How has that happened? Talk to me about why this is important in your approach to building these kinds of collaborations.
Well, I have a philosophy here in partnership in general with my team, and it's that if we look after our partners, we'll always be fine. And so that is really permeated in every relationship that we have. And we have been really lucky. When I think about an advisory board that originally was led by John MacArthur, who was my dean at Harvard Business School, and he was, a mentor of mine. It's, we were able to attract, like we've had, 2 clerks of the Privy Council and, the former head of McKinsey who became the ambassador to China. And now I have the dean emeritus of Harvard Business School. So I think that it's about letting people see what it is that you want to try and accomplish, but also going to those people that that they're aligned with this value. And as I said, trying to create an ecosystem, a group of people that want to see better communities. And for me, the reason it's important is like community is kind of the fabric that everything else is on top of. And it provides sort of strength for everything that happens, whether or not it's education, healthcare, just business in general. It's helpful.
Well, and one of the things that's I think there was some research done a few years ago, and I unfortunately can't cite it, but it was about one of the most important things in successful business is trust building. And I think that applies to partnerships as well. Your point of if we take care of our partners, they'll take good care of us is fundamentally, it's a trust transaction more than anything else. How do you think about trust in community building and business and in life itself?
Well, I think that I had really good role models. So John MacArthur, he did the merger of all the Harvard teaching hospitals. Now, Henry had worked at the Brigham, and he said, if you had asked me, could anybody do it? He said, impossible in 100 years. John did it in less than a year because of the trust. My father did the same thing out at, in many examples, but that is the currency. People have to understand that you want change to happen and you will always look after them. I think that is basically the underlying understanding.
I want to ask a tougher question here. Okay. Chinatown, one of the realities of the neighborhood we're in is that there's a lot of homelessness. There's a lot of addiction. There's a lot of folks that don't have places to go, that have found refuge in this neighborhood and the adjacent neighborhoods. Although this very pressing social issue isn't a core tenet directly of the Chinatown Foundation, is this something you're working on? And if so, why? Or if not, why not?
Well, we knew right from the beginning it would be hard to have a revitalized Chinatown if we didn't help our neighbor in the downtown Eastside, which is why the first project that we built, Bob and Michael's Place, the housing project with a health facility, I had to convince my board that the first project I had to raise 30 million privately, and then I had to raise another 80 million from government, was going to be for the next door neighbor, not for us. But I think what Henry wanted to show, what we both wanted to show, was that we believe in the neighborhood. Like, it wasn't just about us being a special, I'm going to look after my people, so to speak. We're going to try and look after everybody. No, I think it's been a big success. And we are looking at ways that we can help that neighborhood. And I think that along the way, we've built trust with some of the community partners over there, and it's changed the conversation. So I think that particularly government also sees that what we're trying to do is something that they can support, because you cannot help that neighborhood without having a lot of government support.
You mentioned Bob and Michael's place. I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about it. Named after two people who have profoundly shaped your life. It houses, I think you said 260 units?
231 units.
231 units. But it's more than housing, right? It's programming, health, workshop. It's rebuilding, ultimately. Firstly, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit more about that project and how it's so directly connected to the work you're doing here at the Storytelling Center.
Housing is something that we thought that we needed, and it was sorely needed in the downtown Eastside, as well as health facility. When we're working on a project, I like to, what would be a gold standard for housing like that? And we actually called it community housing. You know, it would be probably termed by most people as social housing, but we wanted people to know that there was a whole community of people that were required to make this housing. And I was able to bring in a lot of partners. So, you know, the Boza family, they're a big developer here. They didn't make a profit. The architect also, that was a $2 million contract. He didn't make money. Everybody pretty much was a volunteer. And it changed the way people viewed this project. So, you know, it was interesting as we're building, the general contractor, who I love, it's Axiom, actually said that a number of the trades said that the finishes in that building for community housing were better than their market housing projects. Because if you can give the people that are working on it this sense of purpose and see the people that they're going to be providing housing for, it makes them act differently. And so when I was in the building yesterday, and, you know, we got an amazing art project put together too. We raised $500,000 for artwork that was auctioned off at one of our galas. And it was like some of the preeminent artists in Canada, Doug Copeland, Stan Douglas, Dana Claxton. It's amazing, because we wanted the people living there to show that the community that supports you is so broad, including artwork. And if you go into this building, it does not look like it is basically, you know, social housing. It looks like market housing, except that people in half the building are paying like rates at our welfare rates, basically.
What was it like opening day, seeing your dad's name on the building? It must have been something that you felt proud to add to his legacy. But, you know, it's one of those places where your legacy and his legacy are very much intertwined. Maybe for the first time. Maybe the first time in that building. What was that like?
When I step back and think about it, it was incredibly rewarding that we were able to build a building that, if he had been alive, I think he would have been incredibly proud to have seen what we created. Because as you say, it wasn't just about building the housing. It was every partner that was involved with us. The YMCA, we had a community partnership program. I had 40 companies that agreed to provide goods and services, and, you know, including the Vancouver Canucks who were giving tickets, and, you know, the Whitecaps. So we wanted to create a place where people felt there was so much support that they could live their best lives. And, you know, I think a testament, or sort of a sign that it's working, we've had five or six people on the welfare side that actually had to move out because they got employment and were making too much money. So we moved them into the housing income limit side. And that's what we want to see. We want people, you know, to transition and feel that they're fully supported. And I think that's an important role, that people have to believe that there's somebody that believes in me.
As we come towards the end of today's episode, I do want to talk about success and legacy. Your success, your legacy. You went from building a company to working with family to now leading one of the country's more impactful organizations that literally is part of the skyline of our city. The desire to help people was always there. I think that's really obvious from this interview. But how has your definition of success changed over the past, decades of your careers? Or has it not? Is it still the same?
No, it has changed. I think growing up in the era that I grew up, I'm a graduate of Sauder, of Harvard Business School. I think that it was probably success was more kind of aligned with like a money objective.
Mm-hmm.
If you make this, then you're successful. And somewhere along the way, I think that, maybe it was the cancer that allowed me to be kind of in some ways released from that and decide, what is it you think that you're going to do that's going to give you a sense of purpose? So in some ways, I've said it before that, I thought I was going to come and save Chinatown. In some ways, this mission saved me because it provided me the energy and the drive and the passion to pursue something that is, as we say, is greater than yourself.
And you had breast cancer in 99, I think you said.
Yeah.
It sometimes takes something incredible, unreasonable, tragic, and not to be dramatic, to unlock something new or a new way of thinking about things. And very clearly that's been the case here. Legacy for you, for your family, for this building is a theme I've noticed. When people talk about Carol Lee, 50 years, when you're deep under the ground at peace, what do you hope they'll remember?
That she was a great person who cared about the greater community.
Carol, thank you. It's a great way to end. But before you go, we have a tradition here on Giants. It's a rapid fire series of questions.
Oh, no.
And I ask two things. Don't think too much. And just say the first thing that comes to mind.
There's a lot of them there.
It'll be 3 minutes, 2 minutes. First question. What's one book every entrepreneur or builder should read?
I haven't read a book. I hate to say it in so long. I guess Good to Great was like probably the last time I read a book. Yeah.
What's one company you admire today and why?
It's not one company. I would say I love the mom and pop stores.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What's your favorite podcast? You're not allowed to talk about this one.
I can't talk about this one. I would say probably A Diary of a CEO.
Fantastic pod. Yeah. What's one luxury you'll never give up?
Trainer.
Good answer. That's maybe the best answer we've had. Your favorite place in Vancouver to think?
Anywhere. Like I learned from Henry, daydreaming is a good thing. I can daydream anywhere, but a home.
We talked a lot about collaboration and partnership in this episode today. What's one key quality you look for in a collaboration partner?
Somebody whose values are aligned with ours.
Great answer. What's one word your team would use to describe you?
Somebody who never says no.
I think that's probably a very honest answer. One lesson you've taken from the corporate world that you've applied really deeply and earnestly to the nonprofit world?
Fiscal discipline.
And last but certainly not least, how can our listeners support the amazing work you're doing here at the Vancouver Chinatown Foundation?
Come and visit us down in Chinatown.
There you have it, folks. Carol, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom, your stories. I love the space we're in. I hope all of our listeners who are in Vancouver come and visit. It's been an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Loved being on this show. Thank you so much.
Of course.
That was awesome. Thanks for being here and making us a part of your day. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with a fellow builder. Please keep the conversation going, whether it's at your dinner table or on the SkyTrain. Continue to create, transform, and build a better Vancouver. Ciao.